Okay, so your loom now should be all set up with its warp threads, and it's time to learn how to start weaving and a couple of basic stitches. So in the sample that I've got here, there are kind of two basic stitches that I've used. This one that's kind of fluffy and covers the whole of the strand so you can't see it, that's called sumac, and that's just literally twisting the fabric or the wool or yarn around it. And then this one, which you can see quite clearly on these bigger ones here, which is just where it's woven in and out, and you can kind of see those warp threads just kind of peeking through. That's just your plain basic weave. So they're the two that we're going to learn. But first, before we start all of that, we need to know how to start off on our loom. And when we put the warp threads on, at the top and the bottom, we created a loop like this. Now, it's really, really important that when you start off with your weaving, you actually go through that loop, because if you don't, and when you pull this off, if you've just gone over the top and underneath it, all of your weaving will slide straight up and the whole thing can come apart. So it's really important that we include that in our first piece. So you'll notice in your kit, if you've managed to get the kit, you are going to have loads of different types of fabric. Now, with weaving with fabric, I prefer to rip that fabric apart. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is because it will give me usually a slightly different texture on the edge. If I show you this one here, it's going to give you a slightly different, slightly fluffier texture on the edge of it. And I think anything that you can do within weaving to add more texture and to add kind of different dimensions to it, that's brilliant. So I'm going to go ahead and just snip this and rip it in half. Any plain weave fabric, so by plain weave, threads going that way, threads going that way, not like a knit fabric, should rip really easily. If that fabric doesn't rip, then yes, you're going to have to use scissors for it. There we go. So this will be the bit that I start off with. So you don't really want to start on a corner for this, because what will happen is if you start on that corner, you're going to end up with a lump or a knot right there. And as I said, if that lump or knot doesn't go round this piece properly, then what you'll end up with is all of your weaving coming back out. So I'm actually going to start somewhere near the middle and just tie a knot on there to make sure we've got a good tight fit, and then I'm going to push that through to the back. We can tidy that up later, we don't need to worry about it now. And for our plain weave, we are just going to do the real basics. This is the one you learned at school. So this is where I've started, and then I'm going to go over my next one and under the one after. Over, under, and repeat the same thing all the way along to the end of the row. So if I put it like this, you'll be able to see that I've hit alternating ones, over, under. When I get to the end, because this is one with a loop, I actually, rather than just going under the whole thing like that, I actually need to pass it through that loop. You only need to do this once, and it's just to make sure you secure those ends. And then I can pull the whole thing through and push it down, because you want to get it right down towards the bottom edge of the frame and right to the edge of those loops which are holding all those warp threads in place. So once we've got that one in, we need to turn the corner. Now for the first one, this is slightly different because we've got the loop. So for the first one, I'm going to take it, my very last thread was over, so my very last one on this, you've got kind of two. You're going under and over. We're going to pay attention to what this one is doing here, because when I come back to it, I'm only going to have one in future rows. So it's this one I want to pay attention to. So that was going under, so this time it's going to go over. Okay, so then I'm going to go over the top, under the next one. And it doesn't matter if you can see a little bit of that loop there, because we're going to catch that on the next time round. So over the top. Now you'll notice I've left like a bit of a baggy loop on the side there. Really important to do that, because what you will find is when you start to build the pieces up, it will get tighter and tighter as you go up, because you're adding more and more fabric or yarn into here, so the tension will build up, and eventually it will start to create like almost like an hourglass shape like that. So by leaving those extra little loops on the corners there, that will stop that from happening, and that will kind of keep it nice and straight when you take it off the loom. So we're going to leave a little loop there, usually just, you know, big enough to get the tip of your finger in is enough, and then you can start back the other way. And I'll do a couple of rows of this just so you can kind of get the hang of it, and then we'll move on to the other loom that I've got already set up with some more bits and pieces on. So previous one, if you do ever stop and you need to catch up, just look at what your last one was. So this one's going over the top, so then I know my next one has to be under, and then just every alternate one, over, under, and away you go. Now I'll show you how to turn the corner again on this other side, because that one doesn't have a loop on, and it's important to make sure that you do alternate your sides, because one, it's going to look better, and two, it's going to make a way more solid weave. So I'm just going to squidge that down a little bit, and then do the last 3 or 4 on this side. So over, under, and then when we get to this end, we're going to need to turn the corner again. Now, I'm not particularly worried about any of these loose threads, because I think they do add more texture and add more dimension to it, but if they are really bothering you, you can trim them back. When we get to this end, turn the corner, super simple, we get to the end, this is our last thread, and our fabric is going over the top of it. So the next thing that I need to do is take it round and put it under that same thread, so it loops all the way around. Let me just pull it through so you can have a look at it. So it loops around and creates, can you see there, a little loop that goes all the way around it. Now again, with this one, probably leave just a fingertip there, just enough, maybe not even as much as that. Let's just pull it about that. Just enough so that once we kind of add a bit more in and we start putting more tension on these warp threads, it's not going to start to kind of squish it all up and pull it into the middle. And then you just keep going back and forth. And when you get to this end again, because it's got the loop on there, instead of, let me just do the opposite on the last couple here so you can see. Instead of treating it as 2 now, we now treat it as 1, which means that we go all the way through, straight back over the top, and back the other way. And what that does is the first one traps it and secures that loop, and the second one just builds it up and pushes it down and stops it traveling back up the work, and that means it's not going to come undone. You'll repeat exactly that same process on the top corner as well. With weaving, it's best to work kind of your bottom kind of at least quarter, then go and do your top quarter, because those are the bits that will become really tight when you come to finish it, and it's a lot easier to get them done first and get them out of the way, and then fill in the middle bits where you've got less frame around it and it's just much easier to move around. So what I'll do is I'll swap to my other loom, which has already got some bits and pieces on it, because within the kit as well, and I think it's available as a download, you'll get a kind of layout sheet of what shapes should be where to create the pattern that we've already got on our kind of finished sample here. Because as you can see, there's different shapes and there's quite a lot of movement within there. Let me take this one out of the way so we can see it properly. There's quite a lot of movement in there, and you've got all these kind of irregular shapes. So it's not just straightforward stripes, stripes, stripes. So there's a couple more things that you need to learn to be able to do that. One is to join bits of fabric together. So you can see I've got one stripe here which is similar to this one here on our finished sample here. So it's this fluffy one here, which has been done with that sumac weave, which I'll show you in a second. And then the bit down here in the corner and the bit over here, which is the one I'm putting in with this more kind of yellowy ochre-y colour, that one's just done with plain weave. So a couple of tips. One, if you've got fabric that you're working with and you have come to the end of a strip and you want to add another bit on, you don't need to knot this off and then tie another piece on. There's a really simple way to do it, and that is by putting 2 little snips. Let's put one in this side. Is that little? Might make that just a tiny bit bigger because that's quite small. There you go. So one in that side, and then one in whatever is going to be your new strip as well. And then all you need to remember is oh no. So the old one through the new one, and then the new one, the opposite end of the new one, through the old one. And what that will do is it will create you a lovely kind of flat knot almost. There you go. lovely flat knot. So old one through the new one, and then new one through the old one, and that gives you a lovely flat knot, which will then allow you to continue kind of weaving and adding more and more and more on there. So that's our first top tip. Our next thing that we're going to have a quick look at is that sumac stitch. So you do have a load of beautiful yarns within your kit. Now there are some really, really fine ones. There are some kind of big, chunky, fluffy ones. Let me grab a big, chunky, fluffy one as well. There are loads of different ones in there. I wouldn't advise working with all of these individually. You'll be there for weeks. And plus, it's really nice to get that kind of variegated look, that mixed look of threads that you get from bundling them together. But I'm quickly going to show you how to get this kind of fluffy, more built up look within there. And the way we're going to do that, I'll just do it in the center so you can see, is we're going to use a sumac. So we're going to pop that around there and just tie it off. Again, that will get poked through the back and you won't see it because it'll end up on the back of your piece. And then from there, we are going to, I've just kind of pulled all this up. I wouldn't recommend working in any lengths longer than about 1.5 meters to 2 meters, because you're going to have to keep pulling through and pulling through and pulling through. And the longer it is, the more awkward and the more likely it is to get tangled up. So I'd probably recommend between 1.5 meters and 2 meters. A good rule of thumb is kind of whatever your kind of arm span is. That's a really good length to play with. So for sumac, we're going to create these kind of diagonal stripes, and to do that we're going to come across, and then we're coming kind of over the top, and we're going to bring it back underneath, and then we're going to come back from the top, we're going to bring it down, and then we're going to bring it back underneath. And what this will do is, can you see, if I get 2 or 3 in, it starts to create these little kind of diagonal stripes. So I'm coming up to the top and then pulling it back underneath. And as long as you always travel in the same direction, you get that same kind of left to right or right to left slant on your stitch. Now when you come back, I'll do a couple more and then I'll start to come back the other way, because you can either make it all go exactly the same way, or as I've got down here, you can come in the opposite direction and you can create kind of a herringbone effect as well. So that's what we'll have a quick look at. So I'll just need another 3 or 4 in here to be able to start creating that. And another one. So start at the top and then pull it from underneath. And as long as you keep going the same direction, it will create that same slant. So let's come back in the other direction on this next one down. So if I wanted my kind of stitches to go in the same direction, then I'd start at the top and I would come down this way, but I would bring it so it comes, because we want it to come over the top, so we would come over. I need it on this side. There we go. We'd come over and we'd come back up through that way. And then it's going to come over and it's going to come back up through. So you're almost like tying a knot around it. And you're coming back up through that way, which is then going to create your ones going in the same direction. I don't know if that's particularly clear. Let me get another couple in so you can see. I need to just bring it back up through there. So we start at the top again. And then that, see, I'm always starting at the top and bringing it down over. So that's creating one that's going in the same direction. To create one that goes in the opposite direction, what I'll do is I'll just take these 2 out. And this is the beautiful thing about weaving. There can't really ever be any mistakes. And even if there are mistakes, they're really easy to undo and start again. So let's just take those 2 out and then show you going in the opposite direction, which is going to create that more kind of herringbone look. So there's those 2 unpicked, and I'm back to my straight row that I had in the first instance. So if I'm going to come in the opposite direction now, I'm going to come over, and it's going to come, we always want it to start at the bottom and finish at the top. So it's going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to wrap it round, and we're going to finish it up out the top this time. And then we're going to start it Oh, I've done exactly the same one, haven't I? Have I? No, it has to finish at the top. I apologise. I apologise. So it's going to come round and it's going to finish at the bottom. And then we're going to take it up to the top to create that V shape. So then from the top, round the bottom, and then that's creating my V going in the other direction. From the top, from the bottom, up to the top, pulling it out from the bottom. And you see those? And it's almost like a knitted jumper knit that you start to get with this one. It's a different kind of look altogether. And you can add these to make, you know, big crushing waves. You can add these to make just single rows, which will give you kind of a little bit of froth on the water. It's entirely up to you. What you then do is use the template that we've given you to kind of give you a rough guide of where the colours need to be, and then you can add as much or as little detail in as you like. I'm very lucky to live quite near a beach, so I popped onto the beach and picked up a couple of shells, and I've added those in just as extra decoration. To get those to hold in, I don't know if you can see there, what I've done is I've just created spans with that thread, the warp thread. And the way that that's done is I've just kind of skipped a couple of steps. So if I come and move this one out of the way, so for example, I have a plain weave that I'm doing with this one here, and say this is where we decided we wanted to add the shell. So I would keep going along. I need to get past that knot first because that knot is not going to help us. So let's just get a few of these through, and I would definitely say the best way to do these is to do 2 or 3 at a time. So take the loose end and do 2 or 3 stitches at a time, and then just pull the whole thing through, because if you're doing them one at a time, you will be there forever. And we're going to wrap it round and we're going to come back the other way, and now we can start leaving gaps to allow us to put our shells in. So for example, instead of going over and under one, I would go over and then under these 2. Now hang on, I'm going to need to come around the corner first because we need that to be secure. And then down one, because you always want to leave them on the kind of upward stroke rather than the downward one. So I'm going to leave that, so I've got a one there that I'll be able to use, and then I'll go over 2 this time, because otherwise if I just go over the one, I'm going to end up with kind of 2 or 3 or kind of too many being visible on the front, because we only really want kind of every second or third one. But it is fine to miss out ones here and there, because what that will do is that will give me the ones that I need to kind of catch my shells in later. The other option that you have is if you have say shells that already have holes in, or you're happy to, you know, create a hole for yourself within the shell, what you can actually do is, maybe not with the fabric because it's a bit chunkier, but with any of the yarns, you could actually thread it through and work it in as you go. So you've got lots and lots of things to have a really good play with here. There's also loads more in the booklet which explains about different types of weaves, about other stitches that you can add in. There's the sumac one that we've just been doing, and there's your plain weave as well, also known as a tabby weave. Bobbling, that's a really nice one to use in this, where you just leave little loops of things. But one of the last things I need to come through is to just tell you about this here. So interlocking your various different pieces, because on here I've got several different pieces going on, and if I just shuffle this down, what we'll do is we'll lock these 2 pieces together. So to do that, I need to get, first of all, closer to where I need to be. So we'll move that along another couple of kind of stitches just to get it where it needs to be, maybe one more. And then my next one, which these are on the same warp thread, can you see that goes through here, but it also needs to go through this one. Now I can just wrap it around the thread itself, or if I've left enough on either end, and this is when those extra loops that you leave on the other end come in really, really handy, I should be able to just open this back up There we go. Open that back up a little bit, and then with my next stitch, I should be able to kind of create my sumac there, but in creating my sumac also just pass it through there as well, and that will lock that stitch into this next piece and mean that I don't get a big kind of hole developing in my work. I don't get a big gap. And then you can squidge it all down and start to join it up. And this is where your kind of creativity and your ability to add the different textures in and just have a good play. Weaving, this type of weaving especially, is more about creativity, and definitely if you've got kind of bits and pieces lying around in the house, maybe it's old clothes, maybe it's old balls of yarn, maybe it's a jumper that you want to pull apart, maybe it's just trims and ribbons off things you've been given as gifts. Add them all in. It all adds to it. It's about creating something that is yours. The bits that we provide in the kit, yes, you can complete it with that, and it's a great starting point, but it's all about personalization, and it's all about adding your own touch to it. So the diagram we give you is for this, and it explains how to kind of create these different shapes. If you get stuck, there are loads of instructions in there which take you through everything. And also we've got videos on our Craft Yourself Silly YouTube as well, all about weaving, which will help you even further. So I will leave you to have a play using all of those techniques, and then pop back and see me for the last video, or I'll explain how to take it off the loom.